Welcome back to the deep dive. We have, well, a pretty heavy stack of research on the desk today.
Heavy is right.
And I don't just mean the page count. We are looking at a set of notes and historical analysis titled Social Transformation in Industrial Europe.
Yeah, specifically, we're drilling down into what AP European history categorizes as Topic 6.4 for you guys keeping track of the syllabus at home. But honestly, this is the story of how the modern world was actually built.
Right, because usually when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, the mental movie you get is all hardware.
Exactly, the machines.
Yeah, steam engines, spinning jennies, railroads, it's loud, it's metallic. But today, we are sort of stripping the machinery away. We're looking at the software, the human operating system.
I love that framing, because while the machines were getting faster, the human experience was being completely rewritten. We're talking about a seismic shift here from a rural agricultural life to an urban industrial one.
It wasn't just a change of address.
No. It was a fundamental restructuring of how people lived, worked, and even how they thought about themselves.
But before we get totally lost in the smog, we should probably set the map. The source material makes a really specific distinction about where this was actually happening.
Right.
Because we tend to just say Europe, but that's painting with way too broad a brush, isn't it?
Crucial distinction to make right up front. We are talking primarily about Northern and Western Europe here.
So Britain, France, parts of Germany?
Exactly. The Low Countries, if you look at Southern or Eastern Europe during the same mid-19th century period, the picture is just totally different.
So they just didn't get the memo.
Well, it's not so much that they missed the memo, it's that the economic drivers were different. They stayed largely agricultural for much longer.
Okay.
In those regions, you still had those traditional social structures dominated by land-owning elites well into the 20th century. So this revolution we're unpacking today was incredibly unevenly distributed.
Okay, so we're zooming in on the North and West. The engines are firing up, and the setup in the sources is dramatic. We aren't just talking about new jobs.
Right.
We're talking about the birth of a rigid class system, literal nightmares of city living, and a total rewrite of family dynamics.
It really is the moment where the modern world starts to take shape, for better or worse.
Let's start with the people themselves, then. The research highlights this concept of self-conscious classes, which feels like a very, specific academic term.
It does.
What does that actually mean for the guy on the street?
It basically means identity. Before this, in the old world, you were a villager, a peasant, maybe a craftsman in a guild.
Right.
Your identity was tied to your physical location or your specific trade. But the Industrial Revolution created this scenario where people started identifying strictly by their economic role.
So you weren't just John from the village anymore.
Exactly. You were a member of a class with shared interests that were often in direct conflict with another class.
And this gives us the two big players on the chessboard, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie.
Right. And we need to define those clearly because those terms get thrown around so much in political theory. But here we are just talking about their historical reality.
Let's do the proletariat first, the working class.
These are the factory laborers, the miners, the dock workers. The defining characteristic here is that they don't own the tools they use.
They don't own the factory.
Right. All they own is their labor power, which they sell for a wage.
And the source makes a huge point about migration here. These weren't people who were born into this city lifestyle.
No, and that's really the trauma of it. The vast majority were rural farm workers who moved to the city because that's where the jobs went.
The enclosure movements pushed them off the land?
Yep, and the factories pulled them in. But think about what they lost in that transition.
The notes mention the safety net. Or, well, the total lack of one.
Think about a traditional village. You have an extended family network. You have neighbors you've known for literally generations. If you get sick or break a leg during the harvest, your cousin helps out. The village absorbs the shock. The family unit is wide and deep.
And then you move to Manchester or Liverpool in 1840.
And you are effectively alone. You lose that entire support system. You're in a strange city, working 14 hours a day, and if you get sick...
There is no cousin.
There is no village. Nothing.
That sounds terrifying. You're just walking a tightrope without a net. How did they not completely collapse under that pressure?
Well, humans are adaptable. Since they couldn't rely on blood relatives anymore, the workers basically invented a new kind of family. The source highlights the rise of mutual aid societies.
How did those work? Because it sounds almost like a charity.
It wasn't charity, actually. It was solidarity. It's essentially a primitive, crowd-funded insurance policy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. You chip in a few pennies of your wages into a communal pot. Then, if you get injured, lose your job, or need a funeral, the society pays out.
So it's very pragmatic, but it's also highly social.
Exactly. And that shared hardship, working on the same factory floor, living in the same terrible housing, relying on each other for survival, that is what forged that class consciousness we talked about.
They realized they were all in the same boat.
Right. They realized we are all in this together, and our interests are fundamentally different from the people signing the paychecks.
Speaking of the people signing the paychecks, let's look at the other side, the bourgeoisie.
The middle class. But we have to be careful with that term middle.
Why is that?
In this context, it doesn't mean average income. It refers to the merchants, the factory owners, but also the professionals, lawyers, doctors, managers.
The white-collar sector.
Precisely. And what's fascinating in the documents is how obsessed they were with proving they weren't the working class.
It was a performance.
Exactly. It wasn't just about having money. It was about showing it.
The notes mention status symbols. But we're not just talking about buying a fancy carriage, right? It seems much more psychological.
It ran much deeper than material goods. It was really about moral standing. This is why you see such a huge boom in philanthropy during this era.
Endowing schools and things like that?
Building hospitals, funding museums. They wanted to demonstrate that they were the civilized stewards of society.
Basically saying, look at us, we are the responsible ones.
It was a way to justify their position and their wealth. They also loved joining associations. The source specifically mentions fraternal organizations like the Freemasons. Networking, and solidifying that group identity, separating the respectable people from the masses.
And the ultimate way to separate yourself is physical distance. The notes bring up suburbanization here.
This is a massive geographic shift. If you were a worker, you had to live next to the factory. You walked to work and the shifts were long. You lived right in the smoke.
Right.
But if you were middle class and you had the means, you got out. You moved to the outskirts of the suburbs to escape the pollution and the overcrowding.
So they wanted the profit from the factory, but not the smell.
Exactly. It's a physical segregation of classes that, frankly, shaped the layout of modern cities. You get the industrial core and then the leafy, quiet ring around it.
But for the proletariat, there was no escaping the smell. Let's talk about the cities themselves. The source uses the word onslaught to describe the population influx, which implies violence.
It was violent in a demographic sense. The cities in northern and western Europe simply broke under the pressure. The infrastructure just wasn't there.
Like Manchester.
Manchester exploded in population, but there was zero city planning. You have thousands of people pouring in every single week and literally nowhere to put them.
So they built tenements.
Built implies a level of engineering that wasn't really present. These were hastily constructed, dangerously overcrowded barracks.
Wow.
And when the sources say overcrowded, they mean entire families, parents, grandparents, 5 kids, living in a single room.
And the sensory details in the notes are visceral. It explicitly mentions a complete lack of indoor plumbing.
It's hard for us to really grasp the reality of this. We're talking about cesspools and cellars. We're talking about human waste being disposed of.
Out the window.
Out the window, right into the street.
Just thrown into the gutters? That is insane.
You're walking to work, dodging filth. It created a toxic environment, literally. The source links this sanitation crisis directly to the spread of disease.
I mean, the miasma theory was popular then, right? That bad smells cause disease. They weren't totally wrong about the danger, just the mechanism.
All right, they thought the smell was the disease.
Yeah.
But the notes highlight tuberculosis specifically. TB is an airborne disease that thrives in dark, damp, unventilated spaces.
So you pack malnourished, exhausted people into airless rooms.
And TB spreads like wildfire. It became the absolute scourge of the working class.
It's interesting that the research mentions the rural areas here, too.
Yeah.
While the cities are becoming these disease incubators, the countryside is just emptying out.
That's the flip side of the coin. Rural areas suffered huge labor shortages. The traditional communities were hollowed out because everyone left for the city.
The center of gravity just shifted.
Permanently, from the farm to the factory.
So you have this new class divide, you have these nightmare cities, but the changes went even deeper. They went right into the living room. Let's talk about the family unit.
This is one of the most profound shifts in the whole stack of research. The source describes it as an economic decoupling.
Unpack that for me, because families have always worked, haven't they?
Yes, but on a farm, the family is a single economic unit. The father plows, the mother manages the dairy or the garden, The kids herd the animals or help with harvest.
Everyone is pulling in the same direction.
Exactly. Everyone works together in the same physical place for the same shared outcome. The home and the workplace are literally the same thing.
And industrialization takes a sledgehammer to that.
It breaks it completely apart, but it breaks it differently for the two classes.
Let's start with the middle class. This is where we get the nuclear family ideal, right?
Yes. For the bourgeoisie, the ideal was the cult of domesticity.
That sounds almost ominous, like a sect.
It was a very rigid set of gender roles. The man goes out into the public sphere, the office, the court, the business, to earn the money. The woman's sphere is strictly the home.
Child rearing and making a sanctuary?
Right. And the source mentions something called the fancish factor.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. What is the fancish factor?
It's a great term the researchers use. Basically, having a wife who didn't have to work became the primary status symbol.
Oh, wow.
It shouted to the world, I am successful enough to support this entire household on my own. It distinguished the fancish middle-class man from the struggling worker.
Because for the working class, that stay-at-home mom lifestyle was a total fantasy.
Completely impossible. The working-class family remained an economic unit where everyone had to work just to survive. But here's the tragedy. Unlike the farm, they weren't working together.
Right. The factory separates them. Dad is at the steel mill, mom might be at a textile plant or doing piecework at home.
And the children. We have to talk about child labor.
The notes are really heavy on this. And it's easy to look back and just see evil factory owners, but the source material adds some nuance to the parents' role in this, which surprised me.
It's a really common misconception. Yes, owners absolutely exploited cheap labor. But for the families, sending a child to work was often just a survival necessity.
Doing the math.
Exactly. Adult wages were so artificially low that if the kids didn't work, the family literally didn't eat.
So it wasn't a choice. It was pure necessity.
Right. And that separation, sending your 6-year-old off to a factory alone, was a massive psychological blow to the family structure. It tore at the fabric of domestic life in a way agrarian work never did.
There is one slightly brighter spot in the notes regarding family, though. Companionate marriage.
Yes, a little ray of light in all this gloom.
Yeah.
Over the 19th century, we actually see a shift away from arranged marriages or marriages purely for economic alliance.
People started marrying for love.
They did. The source credits cultural shifts. Novelists like Jane Austen popularizing the idea of romance.
Yeah.
But it was really enabled by increased financial stability in the middle class.
Because if you're not terrified of starving...
Or if you aren't trying to merge two massive estates, you can afford to listen to your heart.
And this started at the top and kind of filtered down.
It began with the bourgeoisie. But eventually, as the working class gained a bit more stability later in the century, the idea that you should actually like your spouse became the norm across society.
So we've got this brutal reality for the working class, disease, child labor, throwing waste out the window. Eventually, something had to give. You can't run a society like that forever without it exploding.
You can't. And that brings us to the intervention. The state finally had to step in.
We're moving the timeline to the mid to late 19th century now. The government starts passing laws.
They realized that the invisible hand of the market, which Adam Smith loves so much, was just crushing the people. The first big one mentioned in the source is the Factory Act of 1833.
What was the headline there?
It focused on children. It prohibited work for children under 9 years old. And for those aged 9 to 13, it limited their workday to 9 hours.
I just have to pause there. 9 hours a day for a 9-year-old still sounds completely insane to us.
It does. But at the time, it was revolutionary. It was the government finally saying, there is a line.
Why does this specific act matter so much in the history books? Is it just because it was the first?
It established a principle. It said, the state has a responsibility to protect children. It set a precedent that the government could tell a business owner what they could and couldn't do with their labor force.
That's a huge shift.
A massive ideological shift away from pure laissez-faire capitalism.
And then came the Mines Act of 1842.
Right, banning women and children from working underground. That was a direct response to both the horrific accidents and, interestingly, Victorian morality.
How so?
Reports came out about women working topless due to the extreme heat in the mines, mixed with men, and the Victorian public was totally scandalized.
So morality drove the law as much as safety did. And then we get the 10 Hours Act of 1847.
Limiting the workday for women and teens to 10 hours. But here's where the source offers a really fascinating insight, a conflict you might not expect. You'd think the working class families would be celebrating these laws, right?
I would assume so. Like, yay, my kid doesn't have to work 14 hours. That sounds like a win.
But the notes highlight that many working class families actually resisted these reforms. They would falsify documents about their children's ages to get around the bans.
Because of the money.
Exactly. If your 10-year-old stops working, that might be 20% of the family income gone overnight. It highlights the absolute desperation of the era.
They needed every penny.
They knew the work was dangerous, they knew it was hard, but the alternative was starvation.
That is a detail that really stops you in your tracks. Progress isn't always welcome when you're living on the edge.
It's messy. But eventually, wages did catch up. The productivity gains from all this machinery finally started to trickle down. And that leads us to the final major transformation in our stack, the rise of leisure.
We are in the late 19th century now. Wages are rising, diets are improving, and for the first time, the working class has two things they never had before: a little bit of money and a little bit of time.
The weekend is born.
And the city started to clean up their act, too. It wasn't just laws about hours, it was laws about space.
They did. We see the development of urban parks. These were designed to be the lungs of the city, explicitly built to mitigate those nasty conditions we talked about earlier.
And the notes mention a specific contraption that took over these parks. I love this visual so much.
The bicycle.
Yes, the bicycle.
It was a huge craze. Think about it. It gave people mobility. You could actually leave your neighborhood.
Hmm.
It was a way to exercise that wasn't manual labor. It was freedom on two wheels.
And it wasn't just doing things yourself, it was watching other people do things. Spectator sports became a massive industry.
Rugby, boxing, horse racing. People wanted to be entertained. They wanted to gather in crowds for something other than a protest or a shift change.
And for the culturally inclined, or perhaps the more fancish.
You had vaudeville theaters, opera houses, museums opening to the public. And one of the biggest shifts, the department store.
Shopping as a hobby.
Consumerism. Before this, you went to a market to buy a bag of flour because you needed flour to eat. The department store introduced the idea that you could go just to browse.
Window shopping.
Exactly. To look at beautiful things, to dream, to treat yourself. It turned the acquisition of goods into a recreational activity.
It sounds so modern.
It is modern. This is the birth of the consumer society you and I live in today.
So let's step back and look at the whole picture here. We went from the chaos of the early days, the filth, the exploitation, the shock of the new, to a society that actually functions.
It's a journey from disruption to structure. We started with waste thrown out the window and children in mines, and we ended with labor laws, public parks, and department stores.
And when you look at it that way, you really see the roots of our own lives in these documents.
Absolutely. The nuclear family, the suburban commute, the weekend football game, the idea that childhood should be a protected time of play and learning. All of these things were forged in the fires of the 19th century.
It's the origin story of the modern West, but I think the most important takeaway from this stack of notes isn't just the outcome, it's the cost.
That is the lingering thought. We look back now and we see the benefits. We see the 10-hour day. We see the sanitation systems. It looks like a straight line of progress.
But for the families living through it, those reforms often felt like a threat.
Yeah.
When the government said, your child can't work, the family didn't see progress. They saw poverty.
Right.
They saw a sudden loss of income they desperately needed to survive the week.
It's a really heavy thing to consider. It forces you to ask, how often do we misunderstand the immediate impact of progress on the most vulnerable? We look at the long-term gain, but we miss the short-term pain that real people are feeling right now.
It's a question you should probably be asking yourself about the technological revolutions happening today. AI, automation. Are we looking at the steam engines and missing the people again?
That is the question.
Something for you to think about next time you're enjoying your weekend off. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.